The night started like any other Friday at Blue Note Lounge in New Orleans. The place wasn't fancy. Wooden floors creaked under your feet. The walls were covered with old photographs of musicians who had played there over the decades. The lighting was dim, just enough to see your drink but not enough to notice the stains on the carpet. Sophie had been planning this night for months. She was 23 and had spent the last 3 years learning to play trumpet. Not at some prestigious music school, just in her tiny apartment after work, practicing until her neighbors banged on the walls. She worked at a coffee shop during the day and spent every spare moment with her instrument. Tonight was supposed to be special. A famous trumpet player was scheduled to perform, someone she had listened to 1,000 times on streaming apps. She had saved up just to sit in the crowd and watch, maybe learn something, maybe get inspired. She sat at a corner table, her trumpet case beside her chair. She brought it everywhere, even though she never planned to play in public. It was like a part of her now. The club was packed. People talked and laughed, drinks in hand. Everyone was waiting for the show to start. But something felt off. The stage sat empty. The owner kept checking his phone, looking worried. Finally, the owner walked up to the microphone. He was a short man with gray hair, the kind of guy who had probably heard every story and excuse in the book. "Listen up, everyone," he said. The conversations quieted down. "I just got a call. Our headliner can't make it tonight. His flight got canceled." People groaned. Some started getting up to leave. Sophie felt disappointed but not surprised. This kind of thing happened. Hold on, the owner continued. "We're not shutting down. This is still a jazz club. How about we do an open session? Anyone who wants to play can come up. Let's keep the music going." The energy in the room changed. Some people looked interested. Others looked skeptical. Sophie glanced at her trumpet case. Her heart started beating faster. Could she actually do it? Play in front of all these people? She watched as a few brave souls headed toward the stage. A guy with a saxophone. A woman with a guitar. They looked comfortable, like they had done this before. Sophie stayed in her seat. She wasn't ready. She was just here to watch. Then the front door opened. It was hard to explain what happened next. It was like the temperature in the room changed. People near the door turned and stared. Then the people next to them turned. A wave of recognition spread through the crowd. Sophie looked toward the entrance and felt her stomach drop. She knew that face. Everyone in that room knew that face. Raymond Blake. The Raymond Blake. One of the most famous jazz musicians in America. He had won more awards than she could count. His music was played everywhere. Other musicians talked about him like he was some kind of god. But Raymond Blake wasn't just famous for his music. He was famous for his attitude. The internet was full of stories about him. How he had insulted young musicians. How he had walked out of interviews. How he believed most people playing jazz today were just pretending, that they didn't understand the real art form. Raymond walked through the club like he owned it. He wore all black. Expensive clothes. His trumpet case looked like it cost more than Sophie's car. He moved with total confidence, the kind you get from decades of success. He looked at the amateur musicians on stage and shook his head slightly. Then his eyes swept across the room, sizing everyone up. When his gaze landed on Sophie's trumpet case, he stopped walking. He turned and started walking directly toward her table. Sophie wanted to disappear. She wanted to grab her trumpet and run out the door, but she couldn't move. She just sat there as Raymond Blake approached her table and stopped right in front of her. "You play?" he asked. His voice was deep and smooth. Sophie nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Raymond looked at her trumpet case, then back at her face. "How long?" 3 years, Sophie said quietly. 3 years. Raymond smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "And you brought your trumpet to Blue Note Lounge. Planning to play?" I was just here to listen," Sophie stammered. "But you brought your trumpet," Raymond said again. He looked around the room. People were watching now. Phones were coming out. "You know what I think? I think you want to play. You're just scared." Sophie felt heat rising to her face. She was scared. Of course she was scared. But hearing him say it out loud made her feel small. Raymond turned to address the whole club. "How about this, folks? The owner said anyone could play tonight, right? So let's make it interesting. This young lady and I are going to have ourselves a little trumpet duel, old school style. I play, she tries to match it. She plays, I respond. We keep going until someone gives up. The club erupted in noise. People were excited now. This was better than any scheduled performance. This was drama. This was the kind of story people would tell for years. Sophie should have said no. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to decline politely and leave. Raymond Blake was a professional. She was someone who had been playing for 3 years in her apartment. This wasn't even a contest. It was going to be a public humiliation. But another part of her, a part she didn't even know existed, was angry. Who was he to show up and pick on her? Who was he to assume she couldn't play? She had worked hard for 3 years. She had practiced until her lips bled. She had given up weekends and nights out with friends to get better at her instrument. Maybe she couldn't beat Raymond Blake. Probably she couldn't. But she could at least try. Sophie stood up. Her legs felt weak, but they held her weight. She picked up her trumpet case. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Let's do it!" The crowd went wild. People were texting, posting on social media, recording videos. Raymond's smile got wider. He looked like a predator who had just cornered its prey. They walked to the stage together. The amateur musicians cleared off quickly, sensing something big was about to happen. The stage lights felt hot and bright. Sophie could see faces in the crowd, all watching her, all waiting. She opened her case and took out her trumpet. It was scratched and dented. It looked cheap next to Raymond's gleaming professional instrument. But it was hers and she knew how to make it sing. Raymond went to one side of the stage. Sophie went to the other. The owner of the club stood between them with the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the owner announced, clearly thrilled by this unexpected turn of events, "you're about to witness something special. A trumpet duel between Raymond Blake and—" He paused, looking at Sophie. "Sophie," she said into the microphone. "Between Raymond Blake and Sophie. Let's keep it respectful. Let's keep it musical and let's see what happens." The crowd cheered. Someone turned off most of the other lights, leaving just the stage illuminated. Sophie's hands were shaking slightly as she held her trumpet. Her mouth felt dry. Raymond lifted his trumpet to his lips. He looked confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday for him, and then he started to play, and Sophie realized she might have made the biggest mistake of her life. Raymond's first notes cut through the air like a knife. Fast, impossibly fast. His fingers moved across the valves in a blur. The melody was complex, full of runs and jumps that seemed to defy physics. It was the kind of playing that took decades to master. Sophie stood frozen, watching him. The crowd was mesmerized. Raymond wasn't just playing notes. He was showing off every technique in the book. High notes that pierced the air. Low notes that rumbled. Runs that cascaded like water. He played for maybe 90 seconds, but it felt like watching a fireworks display. When he finished, he lowered his trumpet and looked at Sophie with that same smile. The crowd erupted. People were cheering, clapping, whistling. Someone shouted, "That's how it's done!" Raymond took a small bow, soaking it all in. Then he gestured to Sophie. "Your turn." Sophie's mind was blank. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't play like that. Nobody could play like that except people who had been doing this their entire lives. Her hands were sweating so much she was afraid the trumpet would slip. She looked out at the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back at her. Phones held up, recording. She could already imagine the video titles. "Girl gets destroyed in trumpet battle. Amateur challenges legend and fails. Watch this painful performance." Her first instinct was to try matching what Raymond had just done. Play fast, play technical, show that she could do complex things too. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was wrong. She had been playing for 3 years. He had been playing for probably 40 years. She would fail if she tried to beat him at his own game. So Sophie did something different, something that surprised even herself. She lifted her trumpet to her lips and played a single long note. Just one note, clear and pure. She held it for several seconds, letting it fill the room. Then she played another note. And another. Slow, simple. Like she was telling a story one word at a time. The melody that came out wasn't complicated. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. It reminded her of sitting by the window in her apartment on quiet Sunday mornings, practicing while the city woke up. It reminded her of why she fell in love with music in the first place. Not to impress anyone, not to be the best, just because it felt like breathing. She closed her eyes and kept playing. She forgot about Raymond. She forgot about the crowd. "See?" He just played what she felt. The melody started sad, almost lonely. Then it shifted, becoming hopeful. There was longing in it. There was pain. But there was also something beautiful. When she opened her eyes, the club was completely silent. Sophie finished her piece and lowered her trumpet. She expected to hear awkward pity applause, the kind of clapping you do when someone tries hard but fails. Instead, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the place exploded. People were cheering louder than they had for Raymond. Someone yelled, "Yes!" A woman near the front had tears in her eyes. The owner of the club was nodding slowly, a smile spreading across his face. Sophie looked at Raymond. His expression had changed. The cocky confidence was gone. He was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Raymond lifted his trumpet again. This time when he played, it was different. He wasn't showing off anymore. He was responding to what she had done. He took her simple melody and added his own voice to it. He embellished it with his technical skill, but he kept the heart of it intact. It was like he was having a conversation with her. When he finished, he nodded at Sophie. Another turn, Sophie played again. This time she felt bolder. She took the melody somewhere new, adding in some rhythms she had been working on. She incorporated a little bit of a Chinese folk song her grandmother used to sing, blending it into the jazz in a way that felt natural. It was risky. It was weird, but it was authentically her. The crowd was completely with her now. They weren't laughing or mocking. They were listening. Really listening, Raymond went again. He matched her energy, playing something that honored what she had brought to the stage. Back and forth they went, each building on what the other had done. It stopped feeling like a competition. It started feeling like two musicians discovering something together. By the fifth exchange, Sophie forgot she was nervous. She forgot this was Raymond Blake, the legend. She was just playing music with another person. They went back and forth for almost 20 minutes, neither one trying to destroy the other, both pushing each other to be better. Finally, Raymond lowered his trumpet and walked across the stage to Sophie. The crowd quieted down, wondering what would happen next. He extended his hand. Sophie shook it. His grip was firm. "You've got something special," Raymond said quietly so only she could hear. "Don't lose it." Then he turned to the crowd and raised Sophie's hand like a referee declaring a winner. The club went absolutely crazy. People were on their feet screaming and applauding. Strangers were hugging each other like their team had just won the championship. Sophie couldn't believe what was happening. She had expected humiliation. She had expected to be crushed. Instead, she had just performed on stage with one of her idols, and people were cheering for her. Raymond grabbed the microphone. "This young woman," he said, "just reminded me what jazz is supposed to be about. It's not about being the fastest or the flashiest. It's about truth. It's about heart." She's got both. More cheers. Sophie felt like she might cry or faint, or both. After the performance, Sophie was surrounded by people. They wanted to shake her hand, get her contact information, tell her how much they loved what she played. Someone said they were a producer and wanted her number. Someone else said they ran a podcast and wanted to interview her. It was overwhelming. Through the crowd, she saw Raymond packing up his trumpet. He was leaving quietly, not making a big scene. Sophie excused herself and pushed through the people to catch him before he left. "Thank you," she said when she reached him. Raymond looked at her. "For what? You did that yourself." "You could have destroyed me up there," Sophie said. "Everyone expected you to, but you didn't?" Raymond was quiet for a moment. "I've destroyed a lot of young musicians over the years," he said. "Thought I was maintaining standards, keeping jazz pure. But somewhere along the way I forgot that jazz is supposed to evolve. It's supposed to change. What you did up there with that Chinese melody, mixing it in, that was brave. That was real." He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "Call me tomorrow. I'm starting a new project and I think you might be a good fit." Sophie took the card, not quite believing this was real.
"Really?"
"Really," Raymond said. "But I'm warning you now, I'm not easy to work with. I'm demanding. I'll push you. You might end up hating me." "I'll take that chance," Sophie said. Raymond smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Good, because that performance tonight? That was just the beginning. You've got potential, but potential doesn't mean anything if you don't develop it. If you work with me, you're going to practice harder than you've ever practiced. You're going to want to quit. But if you stick with it, I'll help you become the musician you're supposed to be." He left the club, disappearing into the New Orleans night. Sophie stood there holding his business card, her trumpet case in her other hand. Around her, people were still celebrating, still talking about what they had just witnessed. Sophie's phone was buzzing constantly. She pulled it out and saw notifications everywhere. Someone had posted the video online. It was already going viral. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine yet. Sophie called Raymond the next morning, just like he told her to. Her hand shook as she dialed the number on the business card. Part of her expected it to go to voicemail, or worse, to find out the whole thing had been some kind of joke. But Raymond answered on the second ring. "Sophie, good, you're punctual. I like that. Meet me at Pearl Street Studios at 2 o'clock. Don't be late." He hung up before she could respond. Sophie spent the next 4 hours panicking. She had to call in sick to her shift at the coffee shop. Her manager wasn't happy, but Sophie didn't care. This was more important than making lattes. She practiced for an hour, then worried she was practicing too much and making herself tired. She changed clothes 3 times. She watched the viral video of their performance again. It already had over 2 million views. Pearl Street Studios was in a fancy part of town Sophie rarely visited. The building was modern, all glass and steel. Inside, everything was expensive and pristine. Sophie felt out of place in her jeans and old sneakers. Raymond was waiting in Studio C, a room with perfect acoustics and equipment that probably cost more than Sophie's yearly salary. He wasn't alone. There was a piano player, a drummer, and a bass player, all professionals. All people Sophie recognized from album covers. "You're early." "Good," Raymond said. "Let's get started." The first rehearsal was incredible. Raymond had arranged a set of songs that blended traditional jazz with modern elements. He wanted Sophie to bring in those cultural influences she had used during the duel. Her grandmother's folk songs. Her own unique style. They practiced for 6 hours straight, only stopping for a quick dinner break. Sophie felt like she was floating. This was everything she had dreamed about. Making real music with real musicians. Raymond was demanding, stopping them constantly to perfect tiny details, but he was also encouraging. When she did something well, he acknowledged it. By the end of the week, Raymond had invited her to join his upcoming tour. 20 cities across America over 3 months. She would be featured as a special guest, not just a backup musician. Her name would be on the posters. Sophie quit her job at the coffee shop. Her manager said she was making a mistake, that she should keep it as a backup plan, but Sophie was done with backup plans. This was her shot. The first month of the tour was magical. Every night, Sophie walked out on stage in front of hundreds or sometimes thousands of people. The crowds loved the fresh energy she brought. Music journalists wrote articles calling her a rising star. Her social media following exploded. Brands started reaching out about sponsorships. Raymond seemed happy with how things were going. After shows, they would talk about music theory, about the history of jazz, about techniques and styles. Sophie learned more in those conversations than she had in 3 years of practicing alone. But around week 5, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. Raymond began making small suggestions about her playing. Maybe play it more like this. Try using this phrasing instead. That Chinese melody is good, but let's adjust it to fit better with my arrangement. Sophie didn't mind at first. Raymond was the expert. He knew what worked. She trusted his judgment, but the suggestions kept coming. And they weren't really suggestions anymore. They were instructions. In Chicago, Raymond completely rewrote one of Sophie's solos. He said the original was too experimental, and that audiences wanted something more familiar. Sophie played it his way, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like her. In Denver, he cut one of her original compositions from the set list. He said there wasn't enough time, that they needed to focus on the stronger material. The stronger material meant his songs. In Seattle, during rehearsal, Sophie tried to improvise during a section that she thought could use something fresh. Raymond stopped the band. "What was that?" he asked. "Just trying something new," Sophie said. "We're performing tonight. This isn't the time for experiments. Stick to what we rehearsed." The other musicians in the band didn't say anything. They just looked at their instruments and waited for Raymond's next instruction. Sophie felt something crack inside her, but she pushed it down. She told herself this was how it worked. You had to pay your dues. You had to follow the leader. Raymond had given her this opportunity. The least she could do was respect his vision, but it kept getting worse. By the time they reached Boston, Sophie felt like a puppet. Every note she played had been approved by Raymond. Every solo had been planned and practiced until there was no room for spontaneity. The thing that had made their original duel special, that moment of authentic musical conversation, was gone. She tried to talk to him about it one afternoon before a show. "Raymond, I feel like I'm losing my voice," she said carefully. "Could we maybe bring back some of the original arrangements? Let me improvise a little more?" Raymond looked up from his phone. "Your voice? Sophie, I gave you a voice. Before me, you were playing in your apartment to nobody. Now you're playing in front of thousands of people every night. And you're complaining?" "I'm not complaining. I'm grateful. I just think you know better than me?" Raymond's voice got sharp. "I've been doing this for 40 years. You've been playing for 3. I brought you on this tour because you had potential. But potential means nothing if you don't have discipline, if you don't have respect for the craft." "I do respect the craft," Sophie said quietly. "Then prove it. Play what I tell you to play. When you have 40 years of experience, then you can make decisions. Until then, you follow my lead." Sophie didn't bring it up again. The breaking point came in Philadelphia. It was their biggest show yet. A sold-out venue with over 3,000 people. There were music industry executives in the audience, record label people. This was the kind of show that could make careers. That afternoon, Raymond called an emergency rehearsal. He had changed the entire set list. The original compositions we were going to play, the ones featuring Sophie, we're cutting them, he announced to the band. Sophie felt like she had been punched. Why? "This audience is too important," Raymond said. "We need to play it safe. Stick with the classics. The songs people know. Your stuff is good, but it's risky. We can't risk it tonight." "But those songs are the whole reason I'm here," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You said you wanted my fresh perspective, my unique style. I know what I said, but I also know this business. And tonight isn't about experimentation. Tonight is about delivering what the audience expects." Something inside Sophie snapped. All the frustration from the past month came pouring out. "You don't want a collaborator," she said. "You want a prop. You want someone who makes you look progressive and open-minded, but you don't actually want to hear what I have to say." The room went silent. The other musicians stared at the floor. Raymond's face hardened. "Be very careful about what you say next." "I'm done being careful," Sophie said. "I'm done playing your way. I'm done pretending this is a collaboration when really, I'm just here to do whatever you tell me." "You're ungrateful," Raymond said coldly. "I gave you everything. I gave you this platform, and this is how you repay me." Sophie started packing up her trumpet. Her hands were shaking, but from anger now, not nervousness. "Where do you think you're going?" Raymond demanded. "Home," Sophie said. "Find someone else to play your show tonight." She walked out of the rehearsal space and didn't look back. Sophie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the bus ride back to New Orleans. Text messages, emails, social media notifications, all of them angry. The music blogs had picked up the story within hours. Rising star walks out on Raymond Blake. Ungrateful musician abandons tour. Sophie Chen's career over before it started. The comments were brutal. People called her unprofessional, spoiled, said she had thrown away the opportunity of a lifetime, said she would never work in music again. A famous jazz critic tweeted that she was another example of entitled young musicians who don't understand respect. Nobody asked for her side of the story. Sophie arrived back at her apartment at 3 a.m. The place felt smaller than she remembered, emptier. She set her trumpet case down and just stood there in the dark, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, reality hit hard. She had quit her coffee shop job. Her savings were almost gone. Rent was due in 2 weeks. She had no income and apparently no future in music. She spent the first week barely leaving her apartment. She didn't practice. She didn't want to look at her trumpet. Every time she opened social media, there were more negative comments. More people taking Raymond's side. More reminders that she had blown her chance. Her mom called from California. She had seen the news online. "Maybe you should come home," her mom said gently. "Take a break from all this. Figure out what you really want." "I know what I want," Sophie said. "I want to make music." "Then why did you walk away?" Sophie couldn't explain it in a way that made sense. How could she describe what it felt like to slowly lose yourself, to become someone else's instrument instead of playing your own? By week 2, Sophie needed money desperately. She swallowed her pride and started applying for jobs. Coffee shops, restaurants, retail stores. Most didn't even respond. The ones that did seemed to recognize her name from the news and suddenly had no positions available. Finally, a small diner on the edge of town hired her to work the night shift. The pay was terrible. The work was exhausting. But at least it was something. She would work from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, serving drunk people and insomniacs, cleaning tables, refilling coffee cups. Then she would go home, too tired to do anything but sleep. Her trumpet stayed in its case. One night, around 3 in the morning, an older musician came into the diner. Sophie recognized him. His name was Harold, and he played piano at some of the local clubs. He had been at Blue Note Lounge the night of the duel. "You're Sophie, right?" Harold said, sitting at the counter. "The trumpet player." Sophie just nodded, pouring him coffee. "Shame what happened with Raymond," Harold said. "But between you and me, you weren't wrong. I've worked with him before. He's brilliant, but he's a control freak. Crushes anyone who shines too bright near him." Sophie didn't know what to say. "You still playing?" Harold asked. By 1955, everything had changed for the young trumpet player from Mississippi. 3 years after that life-changing night in New Orleans, she had released 3 albums. Each one sold better than the last. People who had never listened to jazz before were buying her records. Radio stations that once refused to play her music now fought to get her on their shows. But success came with a price she hadn't expected. Her 4th album was something nobody had ever attempted before. The producer wanted to bring together different worlds of music. They got Dizzy Gillespie, the man who had started it all. They brought in Miles Davis, whose cool jazz was taking the world by storm. And they convinced Mahalia Jackson, the queen of gospel music, to join them. 4 different voices, 4 different styles, all on one record called Trumpet Call. The recording sessions were magical. When she played alongside these legends, something special happened. Her blues-soaked notes mixed with gospel passion and jazz improvisation. The result was a sound nobody had heard before. Years later, people would call it soul jazz, but back then it was just music that made you feel something deep in your chest. The album exploded. It didn't just climb the jazz charts. It showed up on pop radio. R&B stations played it. For the first time, a jazz record was reaching everyone, regardless of what kind of music they usually listened to. She became the first woman in jazz to achieve this kind of crossover success. That's when the real trouble started. Male musicians who had ignored her before now openly resented her. In clubs and recording studios, she'd overhear conversations. "She only got famous because she's different," they'd say. "It's a gimmick. She's taking opportunities from real musicians." It didn't matter that she practiced 6 hours a day. It didn't matter that even Dizzy himself praised her technique. To them, she would always be an outsider. The hate mail came in bundles. Every week, her manager would sort through dozens of letters. Some came from people in the South who were furious that she played with black musicians. They called her a traitor. They said she was destroying American values. The words were ugly, filled with hatred she couldn't understand. But other letters were just as cruel in different ways. These came from people who believed women had no place in jazz. "Go back to the kitchen," they wrote. "You're making a mockery of real music." Some men told her she was only famous because she was attractive, not because she had talent. Others said she was ruining jazz for everyone. The death threats were the worst. Her manager tried to hide them, but she knew they existed. There were nights she couldn't sleep, wondering if someone would actually follow through on their promises. She hired security for her performances. She stopped going out alone. The freedom she had felt on stage started to feel like a prison off stage. But something else was happening too. Something that kept her going. Letters from young girls started arriving. A 12-year-old from Ohio wrote that she had begged her parents for a trumpet after hearing the album. A teenager from California said she had formed an all-girl jazz band at her high school, and they were the first girls allowed to play in the school's music program. A college student from Boston wrote that she had changed her major to music education because she finally believed women could have careers in music. Music schools across the country reported something remarkable. Between 1953 and 1956, the number of girls signing up for trumpet, trombone, and saxophone lessons increased by 300%. Band directors who had never seen a girl in their brass section suddenly had waiting lists. The change was happening faster than anyone had expected. She kept every single letter from those girls. On hard days when the criticism felt too heavy, she'd read them again. They reminded her why she kept playing, why she couldn't give up no matter how difficult things became. In 1957, everything came to a head. The Newport Jazz Festival, the most prestigious jazz event in America, invited her to perform. But this wasn't just any invitation. They wanted her to headline. She would be the first woman to ever headline the festival. The news made the front page of music magazines. Some celebrated it as progress. Others predicted disaster. The pressure was enormous. She knew thousands of people would be watching. Jazz critics would be there, ready to write reviews that could make or break careers. Other musicians would be judging whether she deserved this honor. And young girls across the country would be listening on the radio, hoping she wouldn't fail. The night before the performance, she couldn't eat. Her hands shook when she tried to practice. Doubt crept in like it never had before. What if she wasn't good enough? What if this whole thing had been a mistake? Maybe the critics were right. Maybe she was just a novelty act who had gotten lucky. The day of the performance arrived bright and clear. Backstage, she could hear the massive crowd gathering. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She held her trumpet, the same one her father had bought with his last paycheck, and tried to steady her breathing. Then Dizzy found her. He sat down next to her without saying anything at first. They listened to the crowd together. Finally, he spoke. "You remember that night in New Orleans? That duel?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." He looked at her with those kind eyes that had first made her feel safe on stage. "I heard you practicing in the bathroom before the show that night. You were incredible, but you were also terrified. You were never going to get on that stage by yourself." She stared at him, confused. "The duel wasn't about competition," he continued. "It was about giving you permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to take up space. Permission to be great," he smiled. "Sometimes people need a push. You needed someone to tell you that you belonged on that stage. So I did." Tears filled her eyes. All this time, she had thought that night was about proving herself. But it had been about something much simpler. It had been about someone seeing her potential and refusing to let her hide it. "Now go out there," Dizzy said, standing up, "and play for that little girl from Mississippi who thought she'd never be more than a music teacher in a small town. Show her what she became." She walked onto that stage with her head high. The crowd was enormous, stretching back as far as she could see. She raised her trumpet and dedicated her performance to her father and to every girl who had been told she couldn't do something. For 20 minutes, she played everything she had learned. The Delta blues from her childhood, the bebop Dizzy had taught her, the gospel she'd grown up with in church, the pain of rejection and the joy of acceptance. Every emotion, every struggle, every triumph poured through her trumpet into that summer air. When she finished, silence hung over the crowd for a moment. Then they rose to their feet. The applause started like thunder and didn't stop. 5 minutes of standing ovation. Critics who had come to judge her were wiping tears from their eyes. Musicians who had resented her were applauding. And somewhere out there, young girls were listening and believing that they could do anything. Backstage, Dizzy hugged her tight. "Now you know," he whispered. "This is what you were always meant to do." She finally understood. The duel had never been the challenge. Living up to her own potential, that was the real challenge. And she had just proven to herself and the world that she could do it. The years that followed were like a dream she never wanted to end. Her career stretched across 4 decades, each one bringing new challenges and new triumphs. She recorded 27 albums, each one exploring different corners of the musical world. She won 5 Grammy Awards, though she always said the real reward was the music itself, not the trophies sitting on her shelf. In 1982, something incredible happened. She became the first woman inducted into the Jazz Hall of Fame. When they called her name, she walked to the stage thinking about that terrified girl in New Orleans 30 years earlier. The girl who almost said no to Dizzy's challenge. The girl who had no idea her life was about to change forever. But if you asked her what she was most proud of, she wouldn't mention the awards or the albums or the fame. She'd tell you about something else entirely. In 1965, America was burning with the fire of change. The civil rights movement had reached a boiling point. In Selma, Alabama, peaceful protesters had been beaten on a bridge just for wanting the right to vote. The images shocked the nation. The world watched as America struggled with its own conscience. That's when she got the phone call. Dizzy was on the other end, his voice serious in a way she'd rarely heard. "We need to go to Selma," he said. "We need to do a benefit concert. All the money goes to the movement. Are you in?" She didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" The concert was scheduled just 3 weeks after Bloody Sunday. The atmosphere in Selma was tense, electric with anger and hope and fear all mixed together. Many people told them not to go. It was too dangerous, they said. Things were too volatile. But they went anyway. The venue was a church packed with people who needed hope more than they needed anything else. When she and Dizzy walked on stage together, the crowd fell silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the whole church was applauding before they'd even played a single note. They performed a duet that night, just the two of them. It was the same kind of musical conversation they'd started 13 years earlier in that smoky New Orleans club. His notes would ask a question and her notes would answer. Her trumpet would tell a story, and his would respond with understanding. Back and forth, trading melodies and harmonies, building something beautiful out of sound. When they finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. They raised enough money that night to help dozens of families affected by the violence. But more than the money, they gave people something they desperately needed. They showed that unity was possible, that beauty could exist even in the darkest times, that music could heal wounds that words couldn't touch. 5 years later, in 1970, she did something that would become her greatest legacy. She had saved money over the years, more than she needed. She'd lived simply, never letting fame change who she was at her core. Now she wanted to use that money for something meaningful. She opened a music school in her hometown in Mississippi, but this wasn't just any music school. Every lesson was free. Every child was welcome, no matter their skin color, no matter their gender, no matter how much money their parents made. If a kid wanted to learn music, she'd teach them. The school started small, just her and 2 other teachers in a converted warehouse. But word spread quickly. Children came from all over the county, then from all over the state. Some traveled for hours just to attend classes. Parents who couldn't afford piano lessons or guitar lessons or trumpet lessons suddenly had hope for their children's dreams. She taught there herself 3 days a week, even as her touring schedule remained busy. She'd be in New York performing at Carnegie Hall on Friday night, then back in Mississippi on Monday morning teaching a 10-year-old how to hold a trumpet properly. She never missed a class if she could help it. The kids loved her. She didn't talk down to them or treat them like they were too young to understand music. She taught them the same way Dizzy had taught her, with patience and respect and genuine belief in their potential. She told them stories about her career, about the struggles and the triumphs, about the times she wanted to quit and the reasons she kept going. By the time the 1990s arrived, her school had educated over 10,000 students. 3 of them had won Grammy Awards. 2 played in the New York Philharmonic. Dozens had become music teachers themselves, spreading her philosophy to new generations. But she was just as proud of the ones who didn't become professional musicians, the ones who learned discipline and creativity and confidence through music, then carried those lessons into whatever careers they chose. In 1998, her health started failing. She'd lived a full life, packed with more experiences than most people could dream of. She'd traveled the world, played with legends, broken barriers, and changed lives. She was 82 years old and her body was tired. Dizzy came to visit her in the hospital. He was 81 himself, frail and moving slowly. He'd had health problems for years, but he insisted on making the trip. He brought his trumpet with him, even though doctors said he shouldn't be exerting himself. They sat together in her hospital room, 2 old friends who had changed the world through music. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. After all those years, all those performances, all those conversations and musical notes, words felt unnecessary. When she passed away peacefully a few weeks later, her funeral was held in the same church where she and Dizzy had performed during the civil rights movement. Thousands of people came to pay their respects. Former students traveled from across the country. Musicians flew in from around the world. The church couldn't hold everyone, so they set up speakers outside for the overflow crowd. Dizzy attended, though his own health was failing rapidly. He could barely walk, but he refused to miss it. When the service reached its final moments, he did something that surprised everyone. He stood up slowly, picked up his trumpet, and walked to her casket. He raised the trumpet to his lips and played a single note. Not a melody, not a song, just one long, mournful note that seemed to contain everything they'd shared over half a century. It was a goodbye. It was a thank you. It was a celebration of a friendship that had changed both their lives and the lives of countless others. That note hung in the air long after he'd finished playing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all understood they'd witnessed something sacred. 5 years after her death, the city of New Orleans did something special. They placed a historical marker at the spot where that jazz club used to stand. The club itself was long gone, replaced by a parking lot. But the memory of what happened there needed to be preserved. The marker tells the story simply. Here in 1952, a trumpet duel changed the course of American music and proved that talent knows no boundaries of race or gender. Tourists stopped to read it, taking photos, wondering about the story behind those words. Some of them are young musicians themselves, carrying guitar cases or saxophone cases, dreaming their own dreams of making it big. Her original trumpet, the one her father bought with his last paycheck, now sits in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. It's displayed in a glass case with special lighting, preserved for future generations. Next to it is Dizzy's business card from that first night, yellowed with age but still readable. Thousands of people visit that display every year. They look at the trumpet and try to imagine the young woman from Mississippi who changed everything. They read about the duel, about the challenges, about the triumphs. Parents bring their daughters to see it, telling them that dreams are possible if you're brave enough to chase them. Her music school still operates today, now named in her honor. It's expanded to 3 locations and serves over 1,500 students a year. The lessons are still free. The doors are still open to everyone. Teachers there tell students about the woman who founded it, about her belief that music could change lives, about her insistence that every child deserved a chance to discover their talents. The story of that trumpet duel reminds us of something important. Sometimes the biggest moments in our lives come when we least expect them. Sometimes one person's courage to say yes, to take a chance, to step onto a stage despite their fears, can ripple out and change the world in ways they never imagined. She was just a young woman with a trumpet and a dream, but she was brave enough to accept a challenge, and that made all the difference.